What should parents really give their children? It's not toys. It's not grades. It's not even discipline. According to Carl Jung, one of the greatest gifts a parent can give is emotional integrity. Not perfection, but truthfulness. Not performance, but presence. And yet, in homes all over the world, something else is being handed down instead. Unconscious wounds. Silent expectations. Invisible burdens. Because the truth is, most parents love their children deeply, but they haven't learned to love themselves. And when a person hasn't healed their own emotional past, that unhealed pain doesn't vanish. It gets passed on like an emotional inheritance. Let's begin with the most misunderstood form of love, motherly love. We often think of a mother's love as unconditional, warm, and life-giving. And in many cases, it is. But there's a hidden side too. Jung spoke of the devouring mother, a mother who doesn't nurture her child's autonomy, but instead lives through them. This type of love can look caring on the surface. She may cook, clean, and sacrifice endlessly. But beneath the care is a need to be needed, a fear of being alone, a silent pressure for the child to stay close, never rebel, never leave. Have you ever met someone who says, "I could never move away from my mom. She wouldn't survive without me"? That's not love. That's emotional enmeshment. It's when a child feels responsible not just for their own happiness, but for their parents too. And that's a weight no child should carry. Carl Jung warned us. Whenever a parent cannot separate their identity from the child's, they risk turning their love into control. It's not always intentional. In fact, it rarely is. But a mother who hasn't developed her own identity often clings to her child's success as proof of her worth. She praises them not for who they are, but for what they do. Good grades, polite behavior, social approval. And over time, the child learns a dangerous lesson. If I'm not who you want me to be, I don't get love. This creates the foundation for perfectionism, people-pleasing, and chronic guilt. Have you ever felt like you're living a life someone else chose for you? Or that failing feels like betraying someone you love? That's the voice of unhealed generational dynamics. And here's where it gets even more complicated. A child in this situation will often defend the parent, even when they're hurting. Why? Because the child is emotionally loyal. And loyalty, when unexamined, can lead us to protect dysfunction instead of healing from it. But healing doesn't mean hating your parents. It means seeing them clearly. It means recognizing their humanity, their wounds, their limits, and deciding to grow beyond them. Jung once said, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent." Think about that. Every dream your parent never pursued, every emotion they repressed, every fear they buried, becomes a silent guide for how you see the world. And unless you become conscious of it, you will repeat it. So how do we stop this cycle? By facing it. By telling the truth about what hurt us. By letting go of the fantasy that our parents had to be perfect, and embracing the reality that they were human. And most of all, by realizing this: you don't owe your parents a performance. You owe yourself a life. The wound of guilt and the myth of the perfect parent. There's a silent guilt many of us carry. A guilt that whispers, if I feel hurt by my parents, does that make me ungrateful? And so we suppress the pain. We rewrite the past. We say, they did the best they could. And we stop there, thinking that's the end of healing. But real healing begins when we allow two truths to exist at once. My parents loved me, and parts of that love hurt me. This doesn't mean demonizing them. It means becoming emotionally honest. You see, when we idealize our parents, we inherit not just their strengths but their unresolved patterns. And unconsciously we carry them forward, into our relationships, our parenting, our self-worth. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The parts of ourselves we cannot see, because we've been taught to ignore them. If you grew up in a house where anger was dangerous, you may now smile through everything, even when you're breaking inside. If vulnerability was mocked or dismissed, you may now fear intimacy, fearing you'll be shamed again. And if love was conditional, based on your success, obedience, or usefulness, you may now spend your life overachieving or people-pleasing, hoping someone will finally say, "You're enough." This is not a personal failing. It's an emotional inheritance. But here's the painful twist. The more you bury these wounds, the more likely you are to pass them on. Because children don't need perfect parents. They need present ones, emotionally available ones. Parents who can say, "I'm sorry I was distant. I was stressed, and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that. I see it now." But if no one ever said that to you growing up, it can feel impossible to imagine. And even harder to give to your own kids. This is how intergenerational trauma survives. Not through violence, but through silence. The unspoken becomes the unspeakable. So what does healing actually look like? It begins with emotional truth-telling within yourself. You don't have to confront your parents if it's not safe. But you do have to confront the version of yourself who's still carrying their approval as your self-worth. Let me ask you, do you feel guilty when you say no? Do you shrink when you disappoint someone? Do you chase success, not for joy but for validation? So you're not alone. You're not broken. You're simply reenacting a story that began before you could speak. A story where love had conditions. A story where being good meant being small, quiet, compliant. But Jung taught us, what you deny in yourself, you project onto others. So until you face that wounded inner child, you'll keep attracting relationships that recreate that old dynamic. That's why healing matters. Not to blame, but to reclaim. Because every time you name the wound, you take away its power. Every time you say, "That wasn't okay," you give your inner child the voice they never had. And every time you show yourself compassion instead of criticism, you begin breaking the cycle. Jung also said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. When a parent doesn't pursue their own healing, that burden is passed to the child, who then spends their adult life trying to fix what was never theirs to carry. They become caretakers, saviors, emotional shock absorbers. But you're allowed to put it down. You're allowed to say, "That pain is real, and it's not my fault." Only then can you begin to build an identity not based on pleasing others, but on knowing yourself. Only then can you shift from survival to connection. And only then can you offer the next generation something different. Not perfection, but truth, safety, space to be whole. And that starts with you. When we talk about motherly love, we often paint it as unconditional, nurturing, eternal. But in many families, what passes for love is often something else entirely. A subtle form of control, dependency, or projection. Carl Jung warned that the child who receives too much love is just as wounded as the one who receives too little, because in both cases, the child is not truly seen, only used. Sometimes a parent doesn't give love freely. Instead, they give it with strings attached. Be good. Don't make me angry. Make me proud. In those moments, love becomes a transaction, condition, and the child learns to mold themselves quietly, desperately, into someone they are not just to keep that love flowing. Can you remember a time when you felt you had to earn your parents' affection? This is where the wound begins. And most people never truly escape it. They grow up, but they don't grow whole. They become adults who repeat the same emotional choreography in their romantic lives, choosing partners who resemble their emotionally unavailable father, or trying to rescue someone who feels broken, like their mother once did. This isn't coincidence. It's compulsion. Jung called this unconscious repetition. What you didn't resolve in childhood, you unconsciously seek to recreate, because your psyche is always trying to bring the wound back into view, in hopes that this time you'll finally heal it. But without awareness, that healing never comes. Only repetition. Have you ever found yourself saying, "Why do I always attract the same kind of person?" This is why. Until you break the inner script written by your first relationship, the one with your mother and father, you'll keep playing it out on new stages with new actors but the same ending. This is why it's not enough to just move on. If your foundation is cracked, building a new house doesn't solve the problem. It just collapses again in the same way. The true work, Jung insisted, is going inward. Not to blame your parents, but to understand the emotional blueprints they gave you, and rewrite them with your own hand. So many people try to heal through others. They seek romantic partners to fill the void their parents left. But this never works. Why? Because no one can give you what your inner child still believes it needs. Only you can do that. This is not self-help fluff. This is deep, painful spiritual surgery. You must sit with your unmet needs, not run from them. You must face your grief, not suppress it. You must forgive, not to excuse the past, but to free yourself from its grip. And you must learn to love yourself, not as a performance, but as an act of reclamation. Jung said, "That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. If you don't make your patterns conscious, they will run your life and you'll call it destiny." But here's the truth. The pattern is not your destiny. Awareness is the key that can break the chain. Imagine what it would feel like to love without fear of abandonment, to choose without the compulsion to fix, to walk away without guilt. That is the life that begins the moment you stop waiting for your mother's approval or your father's praise, and give yourself the love they never could. It starts with seeing your parents not as gods or monsters, but as wounded humans. Humans who did their best even if that best hurt you. Humans who passed down pain because they didn't know how to transform it. But you do. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift you can give your own children, to become the parent you never had. Not by being perfect, but by being conscious. By healing the wound so that it doesn't bleed into another generation. So let me ask you, what love are you still trying to earn? Whose voice are you still trying to please? And are you ready to give yourself the one thing no one else can? The permission to be whole? And that starts with you. There's a moment in every healing journey when you realize this painful truth. You are no longer suffering because of your parents' actions. You are suffering because of the story you continue to tell yourself about what those actions meant. This is the final and most difficult stage of transformation. Because until now, much of your healing might have focused on understanding. Understanding your mother's fear, your father's silence, your family's dysfunction. But awareness, though vital, is not enough. At some point, you must choose to stop living in reaction to the past and begin creating from a place of wholeness. Carl Jung often emphasized that true individuation, the full development of the self, requires us to break free not only from society's expectations, but from our family's emotional inheritance. What does this mean? It means you must stop being your mother's caretaker in your romantic relationships. It means you must stop proving your worth to a father who never learned how to say, "I'm proud of you." It means you must stop abandoning your truth just to keep peace with people who never saw you fully. You're not a child anymore, but parts of you still live as if you are. That's the wound. That's the shadow. That's the piece of you that's been frozen in time, waiting for a moment of rescue that never came. Here's the truth that sets you free. You are the one you've been waiting for. No partner will ever make you feel safe until you become a safe place for yourself. No friend will ever fully understand you until you stop betraying your own understanding. No parent, even if they finally change, can give you back the years you lost. But you can begin giving yourself the years ahead. How? By stepping out of your family's narrative. By daring to live in a way that contradicts everything you were taught to suppress. If you were taught that emotions are weakness, show your tears. If you were taught that love is conditional, choose unconditionality. If you were taught that your needs are selfish, meet them with compassion. This isn't rebellion. It's restoration. You're not rejecting your roots. You're replanting them in soil that allows you to grow. Because here's the thing, the legacy of a family doesn't have to be defined by trauma. It can be defined by transformation. You can be the one who turns pain into purpose, silence into speech, and shame into sovereignty. But you must first confront the part of you that still seeks permission. Permission to rest, to feel, to be seen. Let me tell you right now, you don't need it. Your soul was born free. It is not owned by your lineage. Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent. If you don't live your truth, your children will carry your ghost. They will feel your regrets in their bones. They will inherit your inner war. But if you heal, even just a little, that healing ripples outward. You break a cycle. You give your children what your parents couldn't give you, the freedom to be whole. So this is the invitation. Stop waiting for the past to change. Stop asking people to become what they're not. Stop rehearsing your trauma like a script. Instead, become the author. Rewrite the story. Honor the pain, yes, but don't let it become your identity. You are not what happened to you. You are who you choose to become in its wake. This is not easy. Takes grief. Takes rage. It takes mourning the fantasy of who you wanted your parents to be. But beyond that mourning lies a new birth. A life that is yours, not borrowed. A love that is rooted in truth, not performance. A family, whether chosen or biological, that grows from presence, not obligation. And maybe, just maybe, this is how we become truly free. Not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let it dictate the future.